All right, APUS government students, here we go to point 3. So now we're going to dive a little bit more into federalism, kind of see how it works and operates. But before I get too far with it, I wanted to give us that, 35,000 foot view again of where we're at and where we're going. So you can see the things we've talked about: separation of powers, checks and balances, the federal government. It's limited with the Bill of Rights, and now we've been focusing on that middle part there, federalism. Some powers are going to be delegated to our new federal government. Some will be enumerated, all right, expressed in the Constitution, places like Article 1, Section 8 that we took a look at. But then we finished off by talking about how there's additional powers. This necessary and proper clause that's sort of this vague clause at the end of all these expressed powers. Through McCullough versus Maryland, this necessary and proper clause will expand, so you can see how this bubble's now bigger, and I've got implied on both sides. This gives us sort of a visual, is what I'm trying to do, of what McCullough versus Maryland will do, and that is say that there's additional powers through the necessary and proper clause, aka the elastic clause. The federal government has additional powers that aren't just expressed, enumerated. They have implied powers. And McCullough versus Maryland is this first case. Then we talked about concurrent powers. Then we talked about briefly reserved powers as well. So let's move on. Now we're talking about a specific enumerated power, right? We're talking about one of those things in Article 1, Section 8. We're talking about interstate commerce and what does it mean? Now, this is not one of the big 14 cases, but this is an important case. So I put it in there as one of the important cases for me to talk about with you, because I don't really know that you can really understand the Commerce Clause without looking at a case, kind of like this, that gives us what I think is a good example of it. And this is one of the first, might have been the first interpretation of the Commerce Clause. And what exactly did this power of interstate commerce mean when it was enumerated, expressed, and given to the federal government? So Gibbon versus Ogden. This is a boats case. All right, we had our Banks case, now we got our boats case, 1824. So now we're up in the New York, New Jersey area. All right, moving people from these islands was a big business then, and it's still a big business now. All right, so here we go. Ogden is going to get a deal from the state of New York. All right, he's going to be the guy with his ferries, Ogden ferries, or whatever they're going to be called. He's moving people from New York to New Jersey, and he's got the exclusive rights to do this. But as you can see, he's not just operating in New York. He's involved in interstate commerce because they're going to New Jersey. All right? But he's got this exclusive license from the state of New Jersey, excuse me, from the state of New York. Now, Gibbons, my understanding is he also wanted the exclusive license and he didn't get it, but he has a license from the federal government. So seemingly he can go anywhere he wants. And now, as you can imagine, Gibbons is going to compete with Ogden. Ogden's going to be like, hey, what the heck? Get out of here. I've got the exclusive rights. I'm the guy. I paid for these, yada, yada, yada. And Gibbons is going to be like, so what? Screw you. I'm going to compete with you. And here's our court case. So, does the federal government have the power to give Gibbons this license in the first place? What does interstate commerce mean? Is that included in this power? Is licensing like this in this interstate commerce power? And here's what our federal government says, our Supreme Court says in this case. This is not what the federal government said. This is what the Supreme Court said about the federal government and their power with interstate commerce in this case. Again, Supreme Court interpreting the Constitution. All right, here we go. Here's what interstate commerce means. And in a nutshell, Congress does have the power. The federal power encompasses all connections: production, sale, transportation. Gibbons can compete. Why care? All right, here's the deal. Now we're looking at an enumerated express power that gives the federal government, great broad authority in this enumerated sense. Because you think about interstate commerce today, think about all the things that we buy internationally and interstate. Hey, if you're like me, I'm buying stuff left and right from Amazon. I mean, that is interstate and international in a lot of ways commerce. Federal government has control, if they want, over all of this commerce. Think about all that commerce that the federal government has control of. I don't know that our founders really could have recognized just how much that would be in the 21st century. And then you can see how little the states have with intrastate commerce. Wah, wah, wah. So another huge power for the federal government. First implied powers. Now this interpretation of the Commerce Clause, interstate commerce, big powers for the federal government. So time and time again, we're going to see Congress utilize this interstate commerce clause based in Gibbons versus Ogden and other cases to say, hey, the states and other businesses and people are going to say, where do you have the power to regulate this, to do this? Interstate commerce, interstate commerce, interstate commerce. So it's going to be a huge power. U.S. versus Lopez at the bottom there is our second case. And why it's important, because I call it it's a slap on the wrist, I say, to the federal government to say, hey, you're going too far. You're going to try and use the interstate commerce clause to say you have the power, in this case, over guns coming in to schools and on school grounds. Now, certainly, that is not something that we want in our schools, but the issue became, did the federal government have the power to regulate this through interstate commerce? Now, certainly the federal government is involved in bringing guns to school, but could they do it through interstate commerce? And the answer was no. They took the wrong path. All right. So this is a limit. This is a check. This is a slap on the wrist of the federal government utilizing the interstate commerce. This is a win for the states and local governments. All right. That's kind of the gist of what I want you to get from U.S. versus Lopez. All right. Now we move on to talk about cake. Is it cake? You guys like that show? Is it cake? Let's find out. I know I got sucked into that show for a few hours one night, and then it was like, why am I watching this? I don't know. It's just got a mesmerizing quality to it, I guess. But here we go. Political scientists over time, for whatever reason, they've used this analogy, and it was in the books when I was a kid. You still see them in the books today. But when we talk about federalism, they like to use this cake analogy. So let's start here on the left. All right. Now we're looking at layered cake. There's no overlapping of what the federal government's doing, the state governments, and local governments. Fed's doing this, states are doing this, and local governments are doing this. There's no overlapping. Clear authority, no overlapping 1800s. What we're going to see as we go through into this last kind of stage of exam 2 is this movement where it's not so clear, cut, and dry. And they utilize a marble cake analogy where it's not so clear and cut. And this is going to introduce us to categorical grants, carrot grants, stick grants that blur the lines of federalism. All right, so that's the reason for the analogy of the marble cake. All right, so here we go. This marble cake, this cake mix-up that will begin about the time of the Depression is known as fiscal federalism. All right, the federal government is now going to be in control through income taxes and other sorts of things, trillions of dollars today. All right, And that's going to give the federal government a huge amount of power in of itself, right? So what we're going to see is mainly in reserved power areas, again, check yourself, reserved power, state-only powers, we're going to see the federal government kind of meddle into these areas with different mechanisms that they're going to have, different things that they're going to create, these grants. They're going to kind of, you know, get their mitts into some of these state powers. So we're going to take a look at block grants, categorical care grants, and categorical grants called sticks. All right, the stick approach. All right, so we'll start with block grants, and then we'll call it a day. Then I'll move on to the others in lecture 2.4. All right, so here we go, finishing up. The federal government has a whole bunch of money. All right, so let's take a look at my example here. The federal government wants to boost mental health throughout the country in our states. And let's say that the federal government's going to put $100 million, which is kind of a drop in the bucket, but it's $100 million into the states to help combat mental health. All right, this is a great thing. That's a wonderful thing. All right, so, but the federal government from there is like, we don't know how. We don't have all the answers. More doctors, hotlines, clinics, training. What we need to do, we don't know. We don't have all the answers. So this gets back to that positive aspect of federalism, where they can say, hey, states, here's a whole bunch of money, $100 million. We'll pass it out to the various states, all 50 of you, and we're going to say, hey, very little, if no strings attached, as long as it deals with mental health. That's really the only, broad sort of category you got to follow. So I call these kind of stringless grants where the states can experiment. They can try and solve this issue that fits with their state. All right. And the federal government then watches, obviously, to make sure that they're using it for mental health, but then they're kind of looking for creativity, good ideas of Idaho, of Nebraska, of Texas. What are you doing with this money for mental health? And then maybe they say, oh my gosh, you know, Kentucky is doing this amazing thing. The rest of you states, take a look at what Kentucky's doing with their money. Look at the differences that it's making for people in Kentucky. Maybe you utilize some of your money for this, or maybe we're going to have a law for all 50 states that is based upon what Kentucky's doing. All right. And we're going to pass out some more money based upon the success that Kentucky had with this block grant money that they utilized. All right. But the problems that you can see here at the end, sometimes the states, hey, we've got this money. Maybe we want to use it for something else. You know, nothing against Oklahoma, but let's just use them as an example. Maybe we're going to say, hey, maybe financing a stadium, I mean, that's going to boost the mental health of the people in Oklahoma. And I think we can all see, well, gosh, that's really kind of a stretch. That's not something that money should be used for. All right, and I'm not saying Oklahoma would do this, but I had to use one state as an example. All right. So that will then lead us to the federal government saying, well, maybe we better have some more strings attached to the conditions of the various states getting this money. And that will lead us to categorical carrot grants and stick grants. And that's for lecture 2.4.